In this installment of how Alberta payroll is being miscalculated and employees underpaid, we're going to be looking at the concept of overtime pay as specific to the province of Alberta. My name is Christopher Neufeld of Neufeld Legal. And in this video, we're going to look at a particularly important aspect that is all too often overlooked by both employers apparently, but also by all too many employees as to overtime pay and the concept and its application, calculation in the province of Alberta. And it's particularly important because what we see with too much of the payroll software, payroll methodologies and practices that are going on, calculations are being done inaccurately. And that is because overtime pay in the province of Alberta is very, very specific. And it is different from many other provinces, but in particular, it is different from how overtime pay is calculated in the United States. And because so much emanates from the United States, this is adversely impacting the perception of overtime pay calculations among employers apparently, and also employees, and as such, they're not necessarily getting paid correctly in many circumstances. So because of that, it's important to understand what overtime pay actually is in the province of Alberta and how it's to be calculated. And to do that, we need to start by looking at the definition of overtime pay, which is found at Section 22, Sub 1 of the Alberta Employment Standards Code. And it says, an employer must pay an employee overtime pay for overtime hours at an overtime rate that is at least 1.5 times the employee's wage rate. And the most critical aspect in this, and most apparently overlooked aspect, is the last two words, because it's on the employee's wage rate. And this is a defined term, defined at Section 11X of the Alberta Employment Standards Code, which is the hourly rate of wages. And we've talked about the wage rate in a separate video, and we've also talked about wages, which is defined at Section 11X, to be considerably greater than what the base pay is, whether it's a base hourly pay, commissions, or salary. It is far more inclusive in the province of Alberta, and this is both set out in the code and in legal precedent from the courts. So what you have to be doing is you have to be looking at wage rate. It has to be set out. It's supposed to be set out, and we go into this in a separate video. But for this purpose, we'll say you look at wage rate. It has to be there. It cannot be hourly rate. It cannot be your standard rate, your regular rate, your base rate. When you see those terms, you are probably going to have some issues arising because there is more to it than those terms. There is more to the calculation. And it's a leveling off of the calculations that needs to be done. So you have to understand what wage rate is, and you have to understand what the wages are. And only by working backwards from there can you identify what the statutory minimum is for overtime pay. Because when you're not doing that, you are not getting paid correctly. And we're going to set out a series of videos that are going to exemplify how overtime pay is to be correctly calculated. And also we're going to do a comparative with some of the other provinces and countries, in particular the United States, to demonstrate how all too often overtime pay for employees in the province of Alberta is not being done consistent with the laws of Alberta. Because the law is clear, it's set forth in the statute that it has to be at least 1.5 times the employee's wage rate. And that's a requirement for calculation purposes, and that is a law. So that's a basis that you have to understand when you review and assess your situation relative to your overtime work that you've undertaken. Thank you.